Hi everybody, and welcome back to Plastic Models by a Regular Dude and part 3 of the Plastic Models for Beginners. Tamiya 1/35 scale Panzer Kampfwagen 38T. So in part 2, I got steps 1, 2, and 3 completed. So with step 4, we start working on the suspension parts. So first thing we need to do, and it looks like all of those are on the A sprues. So let's go ahead and cut those parts off. So we have parts A3, A4, and 2 A10s. So let's cut these off. I'll cut them back a little bit to give me room to do a nice cleanup job on them. So we got 2 part A's. This will be for one side of the vehicle. And then the A4s. And go ahead and cut the A10 off and get that ready. Okay, after all these parts are cut off and the sprue gates trimmed off, the next thing that needs to be done is there's a seam along the top here from the mold process, and it will be kind of visible possibly behind the wheels. Even if it's not, it's good practice, a good practice to get into. Now for stuff like this, I like to use the edge of my blade and just scrape the seam off like this. Doesn't take very much effort. Gives you a little bit more control than trying to sand it. So you just scrape down like that. That way it looks nice and flat. Okay, so I'm going to do that with all of these parts here. Okay, now that these parts are cleaned up, including these sides here, I have to glue these onto the side of the hull. So the way they glue is there's this tab here and a pin here that fit into corresponding parts here and here. So what we want to do here is make sure that these are level. So because that is flat, I can use that to make sure that it's flat. Just put some downward pressure, putting my finger on top of this part here, and just push down and make sure that it's not rocked one way or the other. So what I'm going to use, because this part here doesn't sit flush up against, so this leaf spring doesn't so this leaf spring doesn't fit flush up against this hull. Boy, that was a tongue twister, a right jaw cracker. I need to put my cement on top of this flat part here, and then this part down here actually does sit flush, so I can use my liquid cement there. So I'm going to use this here like that. Drop it, and then try it again. Okay, I'm going to hold it in place, and I'm going to take my liquid cement, put it here. Hold it in place for a second, make sure it's firmly seated, and then move on to the next one. Okay, so while those dry, I'm going to go ahead and glue these covers on here for the final drive housings. And as you can see, there are 2 pins, 2 corresponding holes there. So it just fits on. Just twist it around. Until it pops into place like that. Like that. And if you're not careful, it is possible to get them off center a little bit and they won't be seated in all the way. So something to pay attention to. Okay, just like that. And then same thing on the other side. Like that. Okay, so that takes care of that part. Okay, next is to glue these swing arms into place. And same thing, got a hole there, fits there, and they're supposed to bottom out on this little curved part on the end of the leaf spring. And it shows you in the instructions how it's supposed to look. The actual axles. Now, this illustration here is if it's upside down like it shows here. So the actual axles, the axle center line will be a little bit higher than where it attaches here. So because these bottom out, I'm going to use the extra thin on this. There. And there. Like that. And if you have it these level like they should be, then all your axles should be level. And I'll show you how I'm going to check that here as soon as I get them glued in. There and there. So make sure those are bottomed out and pushed up. Same thing here. Here. Like that. And then this. Here. And there. So make sure they're all pushed into place, and then I'm going to use this metal straight edge rest it on top of these larger circles and just make sure that all of the axles are touching. That way all the wheels will sit flush on the ground or on the tracks without floating, because that's not a good thing. Okay, so there's that. So I'm going to do the other side real quick like. Okay, so that completes step 4. So now we can move on to step 5, which is gluing together the drive sprockets. So we need parts a 12, 13, 22, and a poly cap. It says right there, make 2. So we have to do 2 pairs. So let's cut the parts off. To clean these up. Now the nice thing about Tamiya on most of their kits now is they put the sprue gate on the side of the tooth here, so it makes it a lot easier to cut off. And if you have some dandy cutters like you see me using, there's no cleanup. Just trim it off right next to the old tooth there, and voila, you are cool. So there's that, and then we have to do this little, whoops, cap here. Now on these, when there's sprue gate on a curved surface, I like to cut it at an angle like this, and then cut the other part off. That way you don't, if you do it right, you don't end up with as much of a flat spot. And you can just touch it up a little bit with the sander and maintain the curve like that. So then take the poly cap, put it in the hole there, and then there is a notch there and like a little keyway there for it to fit together like that. Now sometimes there's a little bit of slop, so you want to make sure you eyeball it and make sure it's lined up. And for this I am going to use liquid cement, just like that. Looks lined up pretty well. Then I'll put some liquid cement on the other side, just to make sure it all goes together like that. Then this little part here, again, there's a little pin and a notch, so you want to make sure that you get it in there straight. So for that, I'll use this glue. Spread it around just a little bit. All right, so that takes care of step 5. So next, step 6, need to glue on the return rollers need to assemble the idler and get the wheels ready. So let's cut off, let's do A9 and A8 first and put those together. Let's see, A8 and 9. That. Same thing as before, just cut these sprue gates off. I'll touch those up with the sander because I don't want those showing up later. And we do some painting / weathering effects on it. So we'll just trim those off. And then you can just feel it with your finger and make sure that it's smooth. If you drag your fingernail across it, and it should just go smoothly without hanging up. Yeah, see, it's catching right there, so now it's smooth. It doesn't take much. The sprue gates on these things are really fine, which is kind of nice. There's some manufacturers that have really big, clunky sprue gates. Take a little bit more effort. Sand them off smooth. And well, there you have it. So then, same thing, a little keyway and a notch for it to fit together so it lines up properly. But you do have to be careful because you could potentially get it off center, so you're going to want to eyeball it and make sure that that central part in here is lined up all the way around. Looks good. Want to let that one dry really well before you start monkeying around with it, because you could twist it possibly, and that would be a bad thing. That would make me sad. See what I mean? It just slid. So you gotta make sure it's lined up. There we go. That's good. A little more cement. All right, next I'm going to cut off the return rollers, which are A14, and we've got 4 of those, 2 on each sprue. these fit on here? Okay, there we go. Okay, these have like a hole with a flat spot, and then the same corresponding pin here, flat on one side. And it fits just like that. And it's a nice positive fit. Some manufacturers have real small pins, and you end up with, you know, potentially wonky return rollers. Okay, now I do want to take a look here, make sure there's not a seam. There is a bit, so I'm going to take my smooth sanding stick and just knock it down just a little bit. It's right along the outside edge, and it will show up when you start doing paint and weathering. But it doesn't take much effort to get it sanded off. So you want to be careful and not sand a flat spot on your return roller. Okay, with those all cleaned up, now we can put them in place. Like this. All right, so we got the return rollers on there. Idlers fit there. Drive wheels, drive sprockets. The poly cap will slide on there nice and snug. So next thing I need to do is cut all of these wheels off. Same thing, different part. Cut there and there. Cut sprue gate off, and then there's a seam right here on the middle. Take care of that same way. It's very light. There's a couple ways you can do it. Generally, what I do is I take my sanding stick and I just roll it like that. It gets the seam line off. Just keep it perpendicular to the sanding surface. Get it as even as you can. And the nice thing is you can tell if you're getting down to where it's flat, because the unsanded plastic's really shiny. Where you sand it dulls it out, and you can see if you haven't got down far enough, like right there. So then it's just a matter of continuing on like that. And there we go. All the wheels are cleaned up, and drive sprockets, idlers, and return rollers are glued in place. So as a quick check on your work, and I just did this, so I'm only going to do one side, you can put your wheels on and set it down on the surface and make sure that they are all indeed touching. So you got a nice nice stable, realistic looking wheels on the ground instead of floating in the air. All right, so that concludes step 6. So with the conclusion of step 6, I think I'm also going to conclude this video, because next time we'll be working on tracks, and that is a little bit more involved, so I don't want to take up too much more time on this episode. So that's it, the end of part 3 of the plastic models for beginners, Tamiya 1/35 scale Panzer Kampfwagen 38T. As always, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, hints, tips, anything like that, put them in the comments section down below, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So until next time, I will see you all later.